What's up, my comic comrades? Today we're talking about one of Spider-Man's best villains, at least in my opinion, and that would be Hobgoblin. Maybe it's just the pumpkin bombs, but I feel like he's the perfect villain to talk about during the month of October and Villains Month here on Variant. It's also kind of shocking that we haven't already given him a History of episode, considering how popular of a Spider-Man villain he is. But better late than never, so let's start talking about one of Spider-Man's best villains and the unofficial successor to the Green Goblin, the Hobgoblin. Hobgoblin first appeared in The Amazing Spider-Man issue 238 in March of 1983. He was created by writer Roger Stern and artist John Romita Jr. As you could tell just by looking at him, he's an offshoot of the Green Goblin. He even uses a lot of the same equipment like glider and pumpkin bombs. But what's crazy about the Hobgoblin, besides him just being crazy, is we didn't know his true identity until a long time after he was introduced in The Amazing Spider-Man 238. And I'm talking about a long time. We only knew where his secret hideout was at first. The first and by far most popular Hobgoblin is Roderick Kingsley. He first appeared in Peter Parker the Spectacular Spider-Man issue 43 in 1980, and then became Hobgoblin in the aforementioned Amazing Spider-Man 238. But there has been plenty of other people to take up the role of Hobgoblin after him, such as Lefty Donovan, Ned Leeds, which is another really popular Hobgoblin. Then you have Daniel Kingsley, aka Roderick Kingsley's twin brother, Norman Osborn, who briefly dressed up as the original Hobgoblin. Then you have Roderick's butler Claude, who fought the Goblin King as the Hobgoblin, but was killed in battle. There's even been more people to don the Hobgoblin mantle, such as Phil Urich and Jason Mushendali. Point is, a lot of people have become the Hobgoblin over the years. Now, although we may touch on several different people who became Hobgoblin over the years, we're mainly going to be focusing on Roderick Kingsley. With that said, let's get into his fictional origin. As I just said, the first and most popular Hobgoblin is Roderick Kingsley, so that's the origin we're going to be focusing on. Kingsley was a fashion designer working out of New York City. The problem is, let's just say he used questionable and or ruthless business tactics. Because of this, Kingsley soon had a financial empire that reached a lot further than just the fashion industry. Being the ruthless competitive designer that he was, he would sabotage and or plot against people. One of these people was rival designer Narada Ravana. This would ultimately lead to her attacking Kingsley under the villain persona Belladonna, who kind of looks straight out of Where in the World is Carmen Sandiego. She started off by sabotaging Kingsley's new fall collection, and when he revealed it to the world, we see she replaced his collection with burlap bags. To which he says, "What? Oh God, not this. This is an outrage." Belladonna then walks in with her thugs saying, "No, Kingsley, it's poetic justice. The outrage is you've been able to get away with stealing the designs, the works of your betters for many years. Do you really think those guards you placed outside could stop Madame Belladonna? Fool. This story is so 80s, and I kinda love it." As Belladonna and her thugs start stealing everything in the ballroom Kingsley was having a show in, Spider-Man shows up to save the day before she could take Kingsley down once and for all. This then leads us to several years later in The Amazing Spider-Man issue 238. In this issue, a petty crook named George Hill, who worked for Kingsley, was on the run from Spider-Man. In order to ditch Spider-Man, he hid in the sewer. It worked, but while wandering the sewer system, he says to himself, "This is the end of the line. Ain't no more automatic lights in here. This place sounds big, like a workroom or something. Might be a light switch on the wall somewhere." And when he finds a light switch and turns it on, it reveals he stumbled upon one of Green Goblin's secret hideouts, where he sees all of his tech. Hill then says, "That mask, all this gear, I've seen pictures of stuff like this in the papers. I must have found the secret headquarters of the Green Goblin." We later see that Hill had filled in his boss, who at the time, we didn't know who he was. We just saw a shadowed figure wearing a trench coat and a hat. Later on, we would find out this was in fact Roderick Kingsley. Anyway, Hill then leads and tells the shadowed figure, "Here it is, man, just like I told you, the Green Goblin's hideout." The man says, "Incredible, notes, private journals, all this equipment." Hill replies, "Yeah, I figured a dude like you would be interested." The shadowed man, or Kingsley, says, "You figured correctly, Georgie. I want you to load everything that can be moved into the van, and while you do that, I'll make sure that there's no evidence of our pilfering." A little later, we see that Kingsley burned down the Goblin's hideout as firemen arrive to put it out. A few panels after that, we see that Hill and Kingsley have unloaded the van that was full of Goblin's gear. Kingsley then says, "I'll get out here, Georgie. You take the empty van and dispose of it. We don't want it traced." He replies, "Not to worry, my man. Nobody can connect it with you anyways. When I'm done with this van, there won't be a clue left." And Kingsley says, "I'm sure there won't be, Georgie." And as George drives away, Kingsley detonates an explosion in the van while saying, "Quite sure." The next morning on the Lower East Side of Manhattan, Kingsley, who again we didn't know was Kingsley at this point in time, goes into his apartment where he stashed all of the Green Goblin's tech. He then says, "I didn't sleep at all last night because I was reading the journals of the Green Goblin. The things I discovered are outstanding. To think, an industrialist as respected as Norman Osborn was the Green Goblin. He was mad, of course, almost totally totally mad. That much is obvious from my readings, but the mind boggles at the thought of what he still accomplished. He goes on to marvel at all the equipment and weapons that Osborn had made, like his pumpkin bombs, his gloves that could shoot powerful electrical bolts, and of course, his glider. Kingsley then uses Norman's tech and inventions to make himself a new mask, saying the plastex in the mold should be fully set by now. As he opens the mold and pulls out the mask, he says, "Excellent, my new face. It still invokes the madness of the Green Goblin, but the slight changes I made to the mold should produce a more fearsome look." He then goes on to put on the Goblin's outfit, saying, "The dyes appear to have fully dried in the costumes that I altered yesterday. Yes, the fit is perfect. This is marvelous. I feel like a new man in this outfit." No, not new, different. It's easy to see how Osborn became so worked by his second identity. The compulsion to escape the strains of society is something I well understand. The trick is to control that compulsion and not let it control you. Norman Osborn may have died, but his legacy, his power will live on, and this time it shall be shaped by a man who knows how to use power. The Green Goblin is no more, but in his place now stands the Hobgoblin, as we get a full-page splash of the Hobgoblin for the first time as the issue ends. And that, my friends, is how the Hobgoblin was born. Now let's move on to story arcs and publication history. The first story with the Hobgoblin and Spider-Man starts in issue 239 of The Amazing Spider-Man, titled Now Strikes the Hobgoblin. In this issue, we see Hobgoblin fight Spider-Man for the first time. Basically what happens is the Daily Bugle reports break-ins in Jersey / people stealing Osborn's tech. Spider-Man then ultimately tracks down one of the break-ins with his spider sense, where he finds the Hobgoblin. Hobgoblin replies, "Spider-Man, here now?" Spidey says, "Right as rain, fright face. Who are you supposed to be? The costume is familiar, but if you're trying to be the Green Goblin, you're using the wrong color scheme." Hobgoblin then says to himself, "I must get out of here. I'm not prepared to deal with him yet. Besides, there's nothing of value here for me." Spider-Man then says something to the effect of, "Hey, don't fly off yet. I've hardly had a chance to say hi." With Spider-Man hot on Hobgoblin's trail, he tries to get rid of him by throwing pumpkin bombs at him, as well as razor bats. After an awesome chase and fight that lasts for several pages, Hobgoblin is finally able to get away because of his hand blast blowing a gas line beneath the street, which of course Spidey had to take care of. While Goblin is flying away, he says, "I knew Spider-Man would be a difficult opponent, but I never imagined he would be like this. I feel like I've ran a marathon, my heart's pounding, every muscle aches. It's all I could do to hang on to my glider." How on earth was the Green Goblin able to stand up against Spider-Man as many times as he did? He must have had some secret, but what is it? I must find out. I will find out, and when I do, I shall humble Spider-Man as he's never been humbled before, as the comic ends. Then in The Amazing Spider-Man issue 245, we see Kingsley recreating Norman's Green Goblin formula, which he got from Norman's notes that he stole. While mixing the two compounds, it starts turning green, and he says, "That's the proper reaction. What happens next?" And what happens next was an explosion where the chemicals got all over his face and hands, with him screaming, "Help, my face, help me." He is then pulled out of the house by a mysterious person who runs back into the house saying, "The authorities will be here in minutes, and there are things inside we must dispose of before they arrive." Kingsley is then taken to the hospital where his hands and face are wrapped in bandages. He then wakes up in the hospital where he says, "I feel fine, just a little lightheaded." He then takes off his bandages and then escapes the hospital only to go back to his house. Once there, he heads down to a lab under his house. He then starts suiting up in Hobgoblin gear saying, "Everything is laid out for me." It's all coming back now as he puts sensors into place on his chest and continues to suit up saying, "Yes, I could feel the power surge inside of me. Now the Hobgoblin can really begin to mystify the world." This of course leads to a battle with Spider-Man once again, but this time the Hobgoblin is superpowered, just like the Green Goblin. So much so, he's able to lift a shipping container over his head and chuck it at Spider-Man. But of course, ultimately, Spider-Man gets the upper hand, at which point he rips off Hobgoblin's mask, and to his surprise, it's Lefty Donovan. Donovan is a small-time crook Spidey is familiar with. He then says, "What kind of scam is this? How did you get so strong? Talk." And Lefty replies, "Strong? It was the Osborn formula. Boss said it would make me unbeatable, but it blew up. Hard to think." Spider-Man then asks, "What's your boss's name?" But before he can answer, the glider activates with Lefty screaming, "I can't control it. It won't respond. The remote guidance system has taken over. He doesn't want me to talk," as the glider flies Lefty into the side of the building, killing him, with Spider-Man left saying, "Oh my god, he never had a chance." And as Lefty's body is being taken away in an ambulance, we see elsewhere that the real Hobgoblin is watching this live via the news, saying Donovan followed his post-hypnotic commands perfectly until the last shock started to bring him back. "It's a good thing I was monitoring him. Soon my computers will have a complete analysis of the changes in Donovan's body chemistry, and I will be able to duplicate Osborn's formula for myself without the explosive side effects. A pity Donovan had to be sacrificed, but he had outlived his usefulness to me." Hobgoblin continues to say, "For the time being, the world will believe that Hobgoblin is dead, but the Spider-Man no doubt suspects the truth. Let him worry about how and when I will strike, if only to add to his downfall. For it shall be the death of Spider-Man, which is reported in the end." That's right, my comic comrades, the Hobgoblin hypnotized a thug to use him as a guinea pig for the Goblin formula before he used it on himself. Smart, but very evil. So now with Osborn's formula perfected, the Hobgoblin has the powers of the Green Goblin without the side effects it gave Norman. Sometime after this, Kingsley later discovered that reporter Ned Leeds knew of his secret identity. He discovered it by following him to his hideout after Kingsley escaped a battle with SpiderMan in the Hudson. Because of this, Kingsley brainwashed Leeds into becoming his puppet, which ultimately led to him becoming the third Hobgoblin. Second would technically be Lefty Donovan, as I just mentioned, and then third would be Leeds. You see, Kingsley was able to control Leeds and even have him take his place in several meetings with criminal bosses, which was actually kind of genius. But it didn't end there. To further take attention away from himself, Kingsley even planted information to make people think that Flash Thompson was the Hobgoblin. Why did he do this to Flash Thompson, you ask? Because Flash publicly insulted Hobgoblin on the television. After this, Jason Malchandelli, the first Jack-o'-lantern, wanted to have the Hobgoblin dead, so he hired someone to kill the Hobgoblin, aka Ned Leeds. After Jason had Leeds killed, he would take the Hobgoblin persona for himself. Sometime after this, Kingsley decided to come out of retirement, as he wasn't happy with what Jason had done to the Hobgoblin name. So the first thing Kingsley did as the Hobgoblin once again was kill Jason. Hobgoblin is a very popular character with a rich history, so there's way more I could say about him, especially with all the different incarnations of him. But skipping stuff here and there for the sake of condensing, more recently in the Access storyline, Magneto recruited Hobgoblin by force to join his team to fight Red Onslaught. The Hobgoblin was also part of Sinister Six Reborn, which consisted of Hobgoblin, Aaron Davis Iron Spider, Bombshell, Electro, Sandman, and Spot. Together they tried to take down a S.H.I.E.L.D. helicarrier and sell it, but ultimately Kingsley sold out the rest of his team, so Sandman knocked him out, and then Kingsley was thrown out of the helicarrier while unconscious. But this is comics, so of course he somehow survived, and then months later, after the Absolute Carnage event, which was amazing by the way, Norman Osborn became a consultant at Ravenscroft Institute, where he made Kingsley one of the heads of staff, even though the two obviously have a very rough history. But just like that, friends, it's time for powers and abilities. Now we're going to continue to stick with the Roderick Kingsley version of Hobgoblin, as we've pretty much been doing this entire episode. Kingsley has a very keen and analytical mind, and enough knowledge of biology and chemistry to understand the incomplete notes of the Green Goblin formula. Because of this, Kingsley recreated and made his version of the Goblin formula, which had none of the side effects found in the previous versions. His version of the formula gave him superhuman strength, which pretty much made him on par with Spider-Man's, being able to lift 10 tons. This also means he was stronger than the Norman Osborn Green Goblin. He also gained super reflexes, speed, stamina, and intelligence, and as you've seen during this episode, he uses basically the same equipment as the Green Goblin. He just uses improved variations of his equipment. Some of this equipment would be bulletproof chainmail armor with an overlapping tunic and cowl. Then of course you have the glider, which goes up to 90 miles an hour and can lift 400 pounds. He also uses his razor bats, pumpkin bombs, and then impulse charge, which is able to reach 10,000 volts. And he carries most of his weapons in a shoulder bag, because remember, he used to be a fashion designer. That's not really why, but that's what I like to think. What I'm saying is, as far as powers and abilities go, he's equal to, and in some ways more powerful than the Green Goblin. But now it's time to move on to reading recommendations. If you guys want some good Hobgoblin reading recommendations, which I'm sure you do, check out Spider-Man Origin of the Hobgoblin, Spider-Man Hobgoblin Lives, Axis Carnage Hobgoblin, and Ultimate Spider-Man 13 Hobgoblin. That should be enough to get you all started. First up for the week of October 7th, we have Amazing Spider-Man issue 49. As if things weren't bad enough for Spider-Man with the Sin Eater, the Green Goblin is back. Next, we have the Justice League issue 54. It's the Titans reunion you've been clamoring for when Starfire and Cyborg join Nightwing in this twisted version of the Justice League. Now we have Thor issue 8. This is one of my favorite titles coming out every month, and now apparently you don't have to be worthy to lift Mjolnir. That's right, anyone can pick up Thor's hammer. And finally, we have Batman issue 100, the finale to the Joker War storyline. This is one of the better Batman stories to come out in recent years, so I highly recommend you check out this issue. We're actually going to do an episode on this issue later on in the week, so be on the lookout for that. And just like that, my comic comrades, that brings another episode of Variant to a close. But if you like today's video, as I always say, check out this one right here. We have tons of content on the channel. But if you like the channel, be sure to subscribe, like, and comment. It always helps us out. But other than that, I'll see you guys next time when I talk about all things comics.